Hey guys, it's Shaylin, and I'm here today with another episode of Recent Reads. This is the series where I just chat about the last 10 books that I read, although in this video we're going to be doing a double episode of Recent Reads and covering 20 books. I took a big YouTube hiatus throughout much of the year because I was moving. I didn't have a filming space. As you guys can see, I'm in my new place with my new bookshelves. But I got very behind on YouTube and everything related to YouTube, and so today I'm just going to be catching up on Recent Reads. I have some really good books that I want to talk about. These are my very subjective opinions on these books. If you felt differently about any of these books, that's a-okay, my guy. I am not the all-knowing, objective speaker and presence on the topic of books. I'm just talking about, in a very loose way, what I read, what it made me feel, what I enjoyed or didn't enjoy about it. I'm not here to objectively break down craft, if you could even completely do that in an objective way. These videos are based on my personal subjective reading experience and the effect these books left on me as an individual. They're not supposed to be objective craft analyses. Reading is so personal and so subjective, and I do think that it's a problem now that on the internet we start to kind of take specific people's word on books as completely truthful and valid, even if we haven't even read those books. Like, oh, well, this person didn't like it, so it's a bad book. Or this person who I don't value the opinion of liked it, so it must be a bad book. Reading is incredibly personal, it's incredibly subjective, and that is okay, and that's the beauty of it. Like, we're all just trying to find those books that really resonate with us, and those are going to be different books for different people. I hope through sharing my thoughts on these books that maybe I could inspire someone to read something that might be that book for them. Getting started with Thirst for Salt by Madelaine. This is a little Australian novel about a woman, I don't know how old she is, having a relationship with a man who's about 20 years older than her. Quite a quiet book that's really just about their relationship, but it's written with so much intensity, so much heat. It's one of those books where a book that is just about a relationship can just be so compelling. I found the writing gorgeous, so atmospheric, so immersive. You really get that feeling of languid heat of summer. It's just kind of lost some of its heat and some of its tension that made it so delicious a bit throughout the middle. But I did really enjoy this. I think if you like these types of books where it is just about like a relationship that really shaped someone, it's just like a really visceral kind of sensory based portrait of that relationship, I think that this is a really great addition to that kind of canon. So then I read a book that's kind of hard to explain, Dayspring by Oliveira. I don't really know how to better explain this other than gay verse Bible retelling, main character is dating Jesus, maybe? Fragments, vignettes, but then you do get that sense of narrative overall. This was wild, and this fits into a style of work I really like where it's kind of biblical and or historical and modern at the same time. It has a lot of moments of real humor, I think, because of the collision of those things. I can't say that I'm particularly familiar with the intimacies of the Bible. I think if you are, you'll get so much more out of this because you'll understand all those little references. To me, those references had no real meaning. I often probably didn't even pick up when they were happening. I'm probably not the target audience for this book. I think the target audience for this book is really queer people who were raised Christian. There was a level of richness that wasn't possible for me to access, which is fine, and I'm aware that I was going into a book that I wasn't maybe the target audience for, which is fine. But that's to say that if you are in that target audience, I think you'll get so much out of this. But the overall effect was super cool. I can't say that I was consistently following the plot in this book because it's quite abstract in its dealing of plot. Really unique. So then I read Vladivostok Circus by Elisa Shua Dusapin, translated by Anissa Abbas-Higgins. I love Elisa Shua Dusapin. Her first book, well, all her books are novellas. Her first novella, Winter and Stock Show, is one of my favorite books of all time. Like, it's a top 3 for me. The book follows a woman who goes to work for this circus troupe as their costume designer. She always writes about people kind of on the fringes of society, and she always writes in this very eerie, liminal, kind of melancholic space. Her ability to say so much emotionally in so little space is so incredible to me. I think this was her funkiest book. It has the funkiest, strangest aesthetic. It has the largest cast of characters, probably emotionally the softest. The emotional core here doesn't really hit as hard. There isn't as much yearning in the relationships. I still really, really enjoyed it, and I will still be so eagerly awaiting every single thing that she publishes. So then I read I Love You So Much It's Killing Us Both by Maria Stovall. So this book follows the protagonist Khaki, and at the beginning she gets an invitation from her former best friend who is throwing a party for her newly adopted daughter. This kind of sets the main character on a course of remembering her life and especially her relationship with her best friend, and it's kind of just about this really intense formative relationship that they had. The voice here is so strong. It's definitely a very protagonist-centric book. It's really, really about getting deep into the mind of our protagonist, and she has such a great voice right from the beginning. And the characters are all weird, but like really realistic. I didn't take too many notes on this book and I don't remember it too thoroughly. I just wrote that it kind of fell off near the end for me. I do remember this starting really strong. I was really engaged. Oh, there's a lot of kind of punk rock stuff going on here, and I definitely remember enjoying a lot of aspects about it. So then I read a book I'm really excited to talk about because it's a favorite that I have read this year, How It Works Out by Myriam Lacroix. This book follows a lesbian couple. Basically every chapter is a different kind of alternate reality or what if of how their relationship could unfold. But the realities also do start to become in some ways kind of interlinked, but not entirely. It's really interesting, and it's just kind of exploring all the different possible permutations of their relationship. This was weird and meta and unlike anything else that I've ever really read. The way that each chapter built upon the previous one, I was expecting them to kind of be standalone realities and almost like very kind of separate from each other, but they actually, the way they built upon each other and kind of like interwove was incredibly unique and brilliant. It's really bizarre, but it also doesn't really have a learning curve, which I think is really impressive. You're kind of just able to be on board immediately with what's happening and what the rules of this world and this story are. The book kind of keeps you in that space, even though there's always really strange stuff happening and we're always shifting into new realities. It works so well to give you such a kaleidoscopic view of this couple in such a unique way. We're not just seeing this couple in their life, we're seeing them in all these different realities of what could be, and they just get stranger and stranger and stranger. So then we have another book that I also really enjoyed, Dead in Long Beach, California by Venita Blackburn. So this book follows the protagonist Coral, who is a successful author of a dystopian series, and at the beginning of the book she discovers her brother's body after he commits suicide, does the really normal thing of taking his phone and impersonating him to the people in his life. Over the course of the following week, her reality starts to completely fall apart. I love a book about someone caught in a disintegrating reality, especially of their own making. This was formatively unique and experimental, but also really insightful and really clever in how it uses that experimentation. It's meta and mind-bendy without being overly complicated. There are points in this book where not much is really happening, but it's still so interesting. There's just always something engaging happening on a character, form, line, detail, emotion level. I really, really enjoyed this one. Okay, so then we have another book I really enjoyed, Rainbow Black by Maggie Thrash. So this follows the protagonist Lacey, who when she's 13, she lives with her parents who run like a hippie kind of daycare. Satanic panic hits. Her parents are accused of like ritualistic satanic abuse by a bunch of the former kids from this daycare. We also follow her in her adulthood, how some of the fallout of this event is still affecting her. The plot is wild. Things escalate quickly. The main character is really interesting, really funny, even though it's not a funny book. There were just a handful of moments where I didn't really believe or understand her actions, and it really took me out of this character that had been built. Like, for the most part, she's a really compelling character, but there were a few points where she did things where I was like, I don't understand what is fueling this. I don't understand the logic within the world of the book and the story that has gone into this decision, and these were like really pivotal, important moments of the story. The book is split into two parts, and the first half to me was significantly stronger and more compelling, and I personally wonder what this book would have looked like if instead of being split into two halves with a big time skip in between them, that there had just been kind of like a loose frame. without that second half, which to me wasn't really needed. This was really fun, really twisty, really weird. If you want something that's just like a really twisty, gripping read, I really enjoyed this one. So then I read Prairie Edge by Kerr. So this book is about a heist to steal bison, which is incredible. Despite that really kind of seemingly funny, wacky concept, it's a really thorough, interesting, poignant exploration of land back activism, indigeneity, the prison system, and incarceration cycles. A concept that seems somewhat silly, but is actually quite serious in its underlying topics and how well that was handled in the book. This doesn't read comedic or silly. There were some weird structural choices, in my opinion, that made it very front and end heavy, rather than having the kind of main events and beats of the story unfold throughout the book in like a narrative arc. Overall, really thoughtful, well-drawn characters. Characters are a highlight here. Considering some of the events we have on the page, some of the consequences for some of the actions felt they just weren't as narratively impactful as they could have been. So then I read Ours by Phillip Williams, which is giant. So this is like a sweeping epic saga. This was vast and godly. The narrative voice of this has a godly power. I'm just looking for a quote in the author's note because I think there's a quote in here that functions as a better description of the book than anything on the back. In the author's note, the author says, "Ours is my attempt at creating a contemporary mythology for Blackness in the United States of America and acts as a continuation of such investment that began with my previous book, Mutiny. I aim to write an epic taking place during the antebellum period where slavery is not the main antagonist without disregarding or disappearing the enslaved. I wrote a book of this length to give a full life perspective of characters who may often go overlooked. In my opinion, there is no main character and therefore no side character. The story is one of freedom and slavery, and like stories of slavery, stories of freedom require the investigation of a range of figures as well as an understanding of how they all relate. The town itself is a character, and the evolution of the experiences and relationships between characters are to be read as a unit. Everyone has their time and their say, their archetypes and their nuances, and I've given them space to have full selves in a freedom they deserve." I think that really perfectly sums up the effect of reading this book, because I got to the author's note at the end and I was like, oh, that is how this is structured. There is no protagonist, there are no side characters. It is the story of all of these people in the context of this town. All of their lives together form the narrative in a way that really has no singular protagonist. Because of the length and complexity of this book, I do think at points it can get a bit swimmy. It's worth the read because I cannot see a way to tell this story in any simpler fashion. The vision and execution to me completely earn the complexity and breadth, and it's rare that I say that about long or complicated books. I am someone who likes short, brief, efficient storytelling where we're very zeroed in on one person, as you can probably tell from all the books that I just read. This is the opposite of that, but it was done so well. So then I read Glorious People by Sasha Salzmann. So this follows a few different women growing up in Soviet-era Ukraine. Never really read a book with this setting, and so I was really intrigued to explore it. The characters were really interesting. The context of the story was really, really interesting. But I found the story itself a bit lacking. It just didn't really tie together. Some of the decision-making around when we were going to, because we follow quite a few different characters, about when we would kind of start and end each section, to me felt a bit arbitrary. Like, I wasn't getting a sense of arc or story with these different perspectives. I think this succeeded in the purpose of capturing the lives of women in Soviet-occupied territories. Narratively, it was lacking to me in terms of like narrative impact. There were a lot of jumps to modern day that just, to me, didn't really do anything to add to the story. Some extent of what I feel the purpose of the book was here, I thought was really well done. Whereas other aspects, like in story itself, left me a little underwhelmed. So then I read Sunburn by Chloe Michelle Howarth. This is set in Ireland in the 90s. And we follow a teenager named Lucy, her relationship with a friend named Susanna that then develops into kind of like a secret love affair, and what that means for her in this very small, tight-knit, conservative community. This was really intense, narratively and emotionally, but I thought it worked so well without ever feeling melodramatic. There's a really intense emotionality to Lucy's character and her narrative. The way that she describes emotions, and especially emotions of love and infatuation and heartbreak, to me felt so powerful without feeling cliche or melodramatic. I saved this one passage here when I was reading because it was just so beautiful, and I think, like, love has been written about a lot. It's one of the most written about emotions, right? I mean, ultimately we're just kind of writing about the same emotions over and over. And so when someone can put quite a simple experience of love into very complex and impactful terms, I find it really lasts. It really sticks with me. Years from now, I will say that tonight was the night I knew that she was the girl I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. This is about more than her body, her tanned skin, her perfect mouth. I am in love with her blood, with her smell, with intangible things that I will never hold. Her laugh, her anger, her soul. When you start talking about souls and wanting to be with someone forever, it's very hard to make that feel not melodramatic. I found it incredibly emotionally impactful. To me, the one kind of struggle I had with this is that to me it felt like it kind of skimmed the most important part of the story, which was heart of their relationship. We spent quite a long time building up to it, and then we spent quite a long time throughout the portion of the story where things start to become troubled because of their social context. I felt like this book really skimmed the core of their love story, and to me that was the part where I really wanted it to, like, really settle. I found this deeply real and relatable. So then I read A Sweet Sting of Salt by Rose Sutherland. I was so excited about this book because it is a lesbian retelling of the Selkie myth. So we basically follow Jean, who is a midwife in Nova Scotia. I don't remember exactly when this is set, but it's like 1700s, 1800s. She ends up rescuing this woman who is in labor, doesn't really seem to speak English, so the main character thinks that she's just a Scots woman. It's incredibly obvious throughout this whole book. Also, if you've read the back, you know, but it's incredibly obvious throughout this book that Myriam is a Selkie, and the main character doesn't pick up on this. She's like, oh, she's just speaking Gaelic. She's just a Scotswoman. She crawled out of the sea and gave birth to a baby with webbed hands. Normal things that happen in Scotland. The situation was really interesting. The characters, to me, were so flat and had almost no depth. And it's got this oddly saccharine tone that, to me, really flattened the characters in drama. Found the romance so underwhelming. No tension, no drama, no heat. The main character is so nice, and that's it. She is not a very deep character. She is so incredibly nice. And she's really just characterized as being so nice. And it's quite grating. I'm like, is there anything else to her other than the fact that she's just so nice? One thing I found quite, irksome about this is how it tries to handle its diversity in a historical setting. The way the protagonist talks about these characters is so incredibly modern, and it feels like it's just to show that she is incredibly tolerant in a way that no one else is. Quite grating. It feels like these characters were only included, and I know that this isn't the truth. I know this isn't what the author was going for, but the way it reads is it feels like these characters were only included just so that the main character could have a moment where she could think, wow, everyone is mean to that guy who's clearly autistic, but not me. I think he's really nice and people shouldn't be mean to him. Or go on like a little rant about kind of like land back, and it's like, it's not like I'm saying that I disagree with these things. We should give the land back, and we should not be ableist. It's like the main character would just go on these little asides to just kind of show her extremely high level of tolerance. There wasn't actually real depth to these characters or to their relationships. So I found it quite irksome. It felt like we had to really stop and pause and cement that Jean is nice and tolerant. Don't worry, everyone, because she is not racist. Okay, well, maybe instead just show their interactions and have these be more rounded side characters. Give them complex lives and complex dynamics. It doesn't make it feel like a real place where people have real lives. This just unfortunately didn't work for me. I was really excited about this book. I really wanted it to work for me. Unfortunately, this just didn't work for me. So then I read Lost in the Garden by Adam S. Leslie. So this book is like a surreal road trip book. They're driving through the English countryside because one of the main characters, her boyfriend, has left to go to this place called Almonby, which everyone knows, everyone says that you don't go to Almonby, but he's going, so now they're going after him. This is a complicated book to review. The writing is very lush and very atmospheric, with kind of just the odd cliche. Overall, those are really good job of building the creepy, unsettling, lush atmosphere of this road trip. The world building is in a really unique sphere where it's creative and it isn't explained. It's like a vibes style of world building rather than a logic-based one, and the mood was pulling so much weight. To me, ultimately, this book was just way too drawn out, and the characters were not rich enough. There's so much meandering, so little character depth. I love nonsense fever dream books. To me, this did not have the tension nor the character work to back it up. There were still things I really admired, and there were still things I really enjoyed. A book of this length and with such meandering plot work really needs the character work to compensate for that, and that just wasn't there. Then I read a book that I really enjoyed, Grey Dog by Elliot and Gish. So this is set in 1901, and the main character is a school teacher. She accepts like a very isolated teaching position. Weird, grisly things start happening. This was a horror that was, to me, genuinely creepy. There was a fantastic slow burn of dread. I was genuinely creeped out by this. I was really immersed the whole way through. I really like kind of like folk horror. This one was just genuinely really creepy, really unsettling. I found the main character a really fascinating protagonist. The book is epistolary, so it is told through her journal entries, so it's very intimate. The main character was complex before she starts falling apart, especially in combination with that journey. She was a fascinating character to follow. And this would be the perfect fall read if you're looking for something creepy and unsettling with really rich setting and character work. I found this to be really, really great. Okay, so now we have a book I'm really excited to talk about. The Extinction of Irena by Jennifer Croft. This book is about a group of translators, and they are the translators for this titular character, Irena Ray. She's a Polish author, kind of a thinly veiled Olga Tokarczuk kind of character. The way that she works is she gets all of her translators to come live with her. Before the book is even published, she gets them to all translate all together. They all revere her, and then she disappears one day. Most interesting thing is the meta form of this book. The book is a novel written by one of the translators based on the events of the book. So it's like an in-world text about the events of the story, written by one of the characters in the story, translated by a different one of the characters in the story. The translator, who's one of the characters, is constantly like beefing with the author in the footnotes, being like, I did not say that, for the record, it did not happen like that. Most of the page space and words are from the main character / author of the in-world text's perspective, right? To me, the protagonist felt like the translator, who, even though we're only seeing him speak in the footnotes, because her perspective was cast over the perspective of the author and main character, I really read the translator as the main character of the book. I wouldn't say that this is too satisfying as a mystery, so I wouldn't go into it looking for a mystery. To me, this was very satisfying as a piece of satire on the topics of translation and literary stardom / literary iconification. In that respect, I thought that this was a wonderful piece of satire. Stuff gets a bit slow in the middle. Ultimately, it's really intricate and weird and meta in such an original way that I really appreciated. So then I read an anthology, Peach Pit, 16 Stories of Unsavory Women by Molly Llewellyn and Crystal Buckley. I read this quite spaced out. I would read 1 or 2 stories in between each book that I read. This is a really eclectic collection of stories about women behaving badly. And you know I love that shit. This book had some of my favorite authors like Kaiming Chang, Lauren Groff, and a bunch of other authors that I was familiar with but hadn't read a ton from, like Alicia Elliott or Chantal Lee Johnson or Macy Card. A few other authors that I had heard of but maybe hadn't read from, and then a few authors who were new discoveries for me. It's just a fun and funky collection over a really fun theme. It's for the girls in the best possible way. Great variety of stories. A lot of them felt more conceptual than being incredibly deep. I would say there's like a lot of big concepts in here. Overall, it's a really fun collection, and there were no stories that didn't really provide what I wanted from this concept. Of course, like with any anthology, you have your favorites. Then I read Earthlings by Sayaka Murata, translated by Ginny Tapley Takamori. I'd only read Convenience Store Woman, and it was a little while ago. People have been mentioning this one for me to read for a while. I finally picked it up. I don't really know what to say about this book, to be honest. We follow the main character, Natsuki, who believes that she is from an alien planet. I'm not going to really try to summarize this book. It's incredibly bizarre. I am going to say that it deals with some really traumatic content. It's traumatic and on the page, quite graphically. This is so weird, and everyone says that about this book, so I'm a broken record, but it was one of the strangest books I've read, and I think that that's both its strength and its challenge. It's both the book's strength in that you're constantly like, what is happening? And it's also the book's challenge in that you're constantly like, what is happening? It was a really quite traumatic book, and a really strange, unique lens on trauma and trauma response. So I think that that's the strength of the book, is how uniquely it looks at these really intense topics, but it's also the challenge of the book in that you really have to ask yourself, like, how are the pieces lining up, and how are we getting from point A to point B, and what even is point A, and what even is point B? It's a lot to wrap your mind around. I can't necessarily say that I enjoyed it. It did keep me on my toes. Then I read Ava Ada by Ali Millar. To me, this was almost like Lost in the Garden-esque, in that it's also set in the UK in a period of strange dissolving reality. It's set during a heat wave, and it just follows the relationship between these characters, Ava and Anna, who are both incredibly bizarre and have their own incredibly bizarre stuff going on. Anna finds that Ava looks exactly like her deceased daughter, Ada. As you can imagine, quite hard to follow with the names. I found this so strange to the point of unclear. I liked all the individual elements. Everything here is so dialed up to the max and dripping with surrealness and weirdness, but it was just hard to follow because the narrative style was so choppy, the names were so confusing, and there was just an overall lack of clarity. So I enjoyed the overall effect and how just unhinged every element of the concept was. I did find myself lost and struggling to kind of keep my bearings on where we were and what was happening and how everything was progressing. Then I read Exhibit by R.O. Kwon. This book follows the relationship between a photographer and a ballerina. Great ideas here. Impeccable prose, like so cleanly but beautifully written, but there was a coldness to this, something kind of removed, something kind of artificial in the execution that I don't know how to put my finger on. It just never felt like it dove into the heart of the story or the characters. Like, that stuff was there, but it was masked by this sleek yet gorgeous prose. It just didn't feel like it was excavating the ideas fully. So I found this beautiful, but maybe a bit clinical, and the book is dealing with very human, visceral topics: religion, art, body, sex, and kink. There was just this removedness to it, this clinicalness that kind of kept me at bay from feeling what was happening. I think this will be a highly subjective book. It's just a question of, do you connect with this or not? Do you connect with the style? Stylistically, it worked for me. Content-wise, it worked for me. I was really interested by the content, but maybe not the marriage of the two. I don't know. I felt like there was more potential, or maybe the book was just too abstract. It was really beautiful, and I think this is just going to be a very subjective book and a matter of taste and how well that conversation between the style and the content work for you. So the final book I read, I don't have here. I borrowed it from my girlfriend, and it was At Night All Blood Is Back by David Diop, translated by Anna Moskovakis. It follows a group of Senegalese men during World War I. At the beginning, I'm not remembering this properly, the main character is in a position where one of his friends is like horribly injured, and he knows that he should probably like put him out of his misery, but he can't bring himself to, and so he just leaves him to like die painfully, and then that ends up horribly haunting him. This book makes you feel like you're losing your mind alongside the main character. It's looping and very disturbing and very visceral. It's the kind of book that is deeply in the main character's mind, deeply in his mind, to disturbing effect. It's very disturbing and very graphic, but weirdly poetic in how it's written, and I didn't find that a disconnect. I found that actually worked really well together. It's a hard one to explain. I think this is a book that really is rooted in its effect, in the effect of reading it, and that's really hard to explain, but it's really well done. That's all for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm now caught up on recent reads, so there won't be one every like other week. I'd love to know what you have been reading lately. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.